This video contains massive spoilers for Avengers Endgame, so if you have not seen the film and care about spoilers, go ahead and leave now. I'm not kidding, this is your last warning. Everything after this sentence is a straight up fireball of a spoiler, so don't say that you weren't warned. During this video, we will be discussing both official Avengers such as Thor and Iron Man, as well as unofficial members such as Antman and Doctor Strange, although at this point I would just consider everyone an Avenger, considering that during the final battle of the film, Captain America uttered his famous catchphrase, "Avengers Assemble," and we do have a lot of viable options here: Thor, Captain Marvel, Iron Man, Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange, the Hulk, Ant-Man, and even Captain America. And let's start with someone I think we can all agree probably isn't in the conversation for top 3, but definitely had a massive power amp in this film. Ant-Man. Or maybe it's time to finally start referring to him as Giant Man. After all, almost all of his significant strength feats take place when he is a giant. Previously, Ant-Man was pretty strong. He defeated Yellow Jacket, who had a more advanced suit than he did, he defeated Falcon, and during Civil War, he could take on Team Iron Man almost by himself. He briefly knocked out Spider-Man with a backhand during that fight, he ripped apart jets, and he used trucks as his personal skateboard during the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp. Not bad, but certainly not in the discussion of strongest Avenger until now. During the final battle against Thanos and his army, Giant Man casually destroys a Leviathan with a single punch, which at one point was the most impressive Hulk feat in the MCU, and Giant Man even appeared to do this with more ease than the Hulk. Also, Giant Man giant-stomped Cull Obsidian, a character that was fighting 3v1 against Bleeding Edge Iron Man, Spider-Man, and Wong, and was handling them pretty easily despite, losing his arm. Also, keep in mind that Cull had fought evenly with Hulkbuster version 2 and was easily able to rip it to shreds. So, big props to my man Scott Lang, who cemented himself as one of the top tiers in the Avengers. Up next, let's discuss the Hulk. Oh, Hulk. Unfortunately, he appeared to be weaker in this film in terms of strength as compared to previous iterations. We know from a statement from the Russo brothers that Hulk is equal to base Thanos in terms of strength, but Thanos was never physically harmed by equipping the gauntlet at its full strength. He tanked that like a champ, and he even took a direct blast from Thor's lightning immediately afterward during Infinity War, but Hulk just couldn't handle it. Hulk even had the advantage of the energy emitting from the stones being gamma radiation, and it still clearly hurt him quite a bit. And we have another video upcoming that will discuss some theories around why we think this happened, but as it stands, Hulk can't really be considered the most powerful Avenger. Another character who was amped in this film but probably doesn't reach the peak of the Avengers' power is Iron Man. With his newest suit, he was able to take more punishment than he ever had before, and dealt out death like I deal out L's in our debate channel. Of course, with the gauntlet, Iron Man's power is amped to insane levels, but the amount of damage he takes as a result obviously limits his overall effectiveness. Being able to make Thanos bleed is no small feat, and his new suit makes him even more powerful, but there are just stronger Avengers that we need to discuss. Alright, so now it's time to get into the real heavy hitters. I would consider the following characters all in the running for the most powerful Avenger, but I won't give my final judgment until the end of the video. Let's begin with everyone's favorite bearded beast, Thor. So unfortunately, like the Hulk, Thor actually got weaker between Infinity War and Endgame. Dual-wielding Mjolnir and Stormbreaker would easily make him the strongest if he was in his prime, but he's definitely not. He's overweight, out of shape, and to be honest, he was probably a little buzzed while fighting in the final battle. So let's ignore Fat Thor and discuss Infinity War Thor. Let's begin by taking a look at the Infinity Stones. The Collector, who is the most knowledgeable character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe on the capabilities of the Infinity Stones, states that the Infinity Stones can only be wielded by beings of extraordinary strength, and that the stones are able to destroy entire civilizations. Additionally, S.H.I.E.L.D. believes the Space Stone has the potential energy to wipe out the planet, and Thor states that the Mind Stone could unleash more devastation than what Scarlet Witch saw in her vision of Ultron. Which in layman's terms means that each one of them could probably destroy a planet, or at least these 3 specific stones. We've seen the Power Stone annihilate a planet and crumble a moon, but Thor has also stated that Thanos destroyed Xandar with the power of the Power Stone alone. So there's no debate that anyone wielding the Power Stone has planetary destructive capabilities. The other stones might be debatable if you don't want to go off of just statements, but we know that the majority of the stones are able to create massive energy blasts. So, with all of that said, Thor is able to blitz Thanos and cut through an attack from all 6 Infinity Stones with his Stormbreaker. The Russos have stated that Thanos didn't know Stormbreaker was coming his way, and if he did, he would have been able to use the stones in a better way to react to Stormbreaker. So, in my opinion, this blast from Thanos at a low ball is planetary, which would make Thor's striking power with Stormbreaker planetary, which is pretty damn impressive. The next top tier we need to discuss is Captain Marvel herself, and you need to put those torches and pitchforks away because the girl was barely even in Endgame. You have nothing to complain about. She was awesome. And the first thing we need to consider is Carol's power came indirectly from the Tesseract in the form of the Lightspeed engine, which was designed to allow the Skrull race to get as far away from the Kree as possible. This was achieved by wielding the space manipulation of the Space Stone and using that to harness photons. A photon is a type of elementary particle which has 0 rest mass and always moves at the speed of light within a vacuum. Using the power of photons, the Lightspeed engine would allow the Skrulls to travel faster than anything thought possible, capable of traversing multiple galaxies in almost no time. Carol is able to wield this energy to create photon blasts and fly at incredible speeds, making her the fastest character in the MCU in terms of travel speed by millions and millions of times over. Now keep in mind, this does not factor into combat speed, which is completely different. So her enhanced strength and durability comes from the Kree blood flowing through her veins, and it seems to be further amped by the Lightspeed engine energy, as she has tanked multiple blasts from Thanos' command ship, which was just destroying all the other Avengers below her, and she also took a headbutt from Thanos, which ragdolled characters like Iron Man. Carol didn't even flinch after taking this headbutt. The only thing that really harmed her was a punch from Thanos, amped to possibly planetary levels by the Power Stone. In terms of strength and attack potency, she was able to trade blows with Thanos throughout the final battle, and she completely demolished his ship, the Sanctuary 2, with no trouble at all. Now let's talk about the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange, who had one of the best showings out of all the characters who took on Thanos in a 1v1. Thanos was pressed hard and had to use every single Infinity Stone that he had at the time to keep up with Doctor Strange, who wasn't even using the Time Stone in this battle. So this was a suppressed version of Strange, who was essentially just going through the motions to ensure that the future that he saw came to fruition. He knew that he had to lose to Thanos, and he knew Iron Man would as well. Taking that into consideration, and the fact that he was facing inarguably one of the strongest versions of Thanos that we've seen, Doctor Strange is just not to be messed with. The versatility at his disposal, along with the natural talent he has with the mystic arts, allowed him to defeat Caecilius, Loki, and Dormammu, the most powerful being in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Strange clearly deserves to be in the conversation. Next, we have one of the real surprises of Endgame, Scarlet Witch. We've always known that she was powerful, but her confidence was her true weakness. In her early showing, she was able to tear through Ultron's chest with her magic, but other times struggled, like when attempting to contain a blast during the opening scene of Civil War. After gaining more confidence throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe, she began to really show her strength as she was able to completely dominate Vision, she was able to destroy an Infinity Stone, and of course she held back Thanos briefly while destroying that Infinity Stone. It was generally accepted by the power scaling and versus battle community that Thanos was definitely holding back heavily in Wakanda, as there was no way he could lose, and that's pretty obvious. I never thought that he was going all out to get through Wanda's blast, but he did have to exert some force. But in Endgame, she shows just how powerful she truly is. She was not only able to keep up with Thanos in hand-to-hand combat, but she was able to completely overwhelm him with her pure power, causing him to rain down fire from his command ship to get free. There's no doubt in my mind that if she wasn't knocked back by these blasts, that she definitely would have torn Thanos apart. And the final Avenger in consideration is the man himself, Steve Rogers, the Captain, the Nomad, the wielder of America's ass, Captain America. Finally worthy of Mjolnir, which we will have a video on as well, detailing the moment that he became worthy, but back to his power.
Whosoever holds of this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor.
That's the enchantment given to Mjolnir by Odin himself, and what this means is very simple. Because Captain America was worthy, he instantly received a stat boost to his speed, durability, and of course, his strength, making him on par with pre-awakening Thor, but at the same time, better in every way. Cap seems to have an instant mastery with Mjolnir, using it in unison with his shield to hit Thanos with devastating combos. This is likely due to the fact that Cap is the most skilled fighter in the MCU besides possibly Thanos himself. Being so masterful in combat, this significant stat boost instantly makes him much more deadly than pre-awakened Thor. But not only was he able to expertly wield Mjolnir and the shield in tandem, he was also able to call down lightning as easily as awakened Thor. Thanos was so impressed with Cap that he brought down his army out of what I felt was fear for his life, so much respect for our boy from Brooklyn. So now that we've laid out all the possibilities and looked at all the evidence, who is the most powerful Avenger? In my opinion, it's the Sorcerer Supreme, Doctor Strange. Considering how he was able to contend with a 4-stone Thanos while not even using his own Infinity Stone is incredible. Without the Infinity Stones that Thanos had, Doctor Strange would have easily beaten the Mad Titan. Without the Power Stone and Space Stone, Thanos had no counter to the Mirror Dimension. Without the Power Stone and Soul Stone, he had no counter to Doctor Strange's duplication spell and the Eldritch Whip. And without the Reality and Space Stones, he would have been unable to close the distance between himself and the Sorcerer Supreme. Doctor Strange has all of these spells and more available to him in his base form, while being relative to every other Avenger on the list in terms of speed. His vast arsenal of spells would allow him to defeat any single one of them pretty easily. I mean, Thor might be able to counter the Mirror Dimension with Stormbreaker, but he could not overcome any portals or the duplication spell. Captain Marvel may be able to maneuver out of the way of any portals and try to speed blitz Doctor Strange, but what could she do against the Mirror Dimension, Time Stone, or Crimson Bands of Sidorak? Wanda has the raw power rivaling the top-tier Avengers, but her utter lack of durability would make her an easy target for offensive spells. Overall, Doctor Strange just has too many tricks up his sleeves to be taken down by any single Avenger, so Doctor Strange, in my opinion, is the most powerful Avenger of them all.
It was first seen in 2016's Captain America Civil War, but its absence in Endgame just proves that Marvel Studios likes to trick us. We bet you'd probably forgotten that it was strongly expected to appear in the movie. Avengers Endgame opened with the heartbreaking scene of Clint Barton's whole family turning to dust before his eyes on the Barton family's remote farm. Clint's wife is famously played by ER and Scooby-Doo star Linda Cardellini, but less is known about the child actors who portray the couple's kids. It may come as a surprise to you, therefore, to learn that Ava Russo, daughter of Endgame director Joe Russo, played Clint's daughter Lila Barton. She was the girl Clint was training to use a bow and arrow in that opening scene. When we were first reintroduced to Thanos at the start of Avengers Endgame, he was on the same farm we saw him on at the end of Avengers Infinity War, which Nebula confirmed was a place called the Garden. With his mighty golden armor acting as a scarecrow to protect his crops, the Mad Titan was wearing a humble rag, which appeared to be a nod to his simple clothing at the end of the Infinity Gauntlet comic book arc. Although not identical to what Thanos was wearing in the comics, it was certainly similar enough to have quite obviously been influenced by it. When the surviving Avengers confronted Thanos at the Garden, before Thor cut his head off, he also cut his hand off. In case you've forgotten, this is actually a recurring theme in the MCU, with the purpose of it being a nod to Star Wars.
If you only knew the power of the dark side.
The likes of Bucky Barnes, Aldrich Killian, Ulysses Klaue, and Groot have all lost appendages in the franchise. And in Avengers Endgame, Thanos continued that theme. In fact, Bruce Banner also lost the use of his arm when he reversed the snap, so that also continues the theme to a lesser extent. When Steve Rogers was running a support group for survivors of the decimation, director Joe Russo's cameo as the MCU's first openly gay man, talking about his first date in 5 years, was an easy one to spot. But there was a less obvious cameo in that same scene, in the form of Jim Starlin, who was playing another participant in the group who asked Russo's character about his date. Starlin is a comic book writer and artist, who happens to be responsible for the creation of Thanos, as well as characters like Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, and Shang-Chi. Fans have been speculating about how Paul Rudd Scott Lang would escape the Quantum Realm, since he got stuck in there at the end of last year's Antman and the Wasp, and all was revealed in Avengers Endgame. The Quantum Tunnel van that took him to the Quantum Realm in the first place had been sent to a storage facility in San Francisco, where 5 years later, a rat activated the tunnel by crawling over some buttons. The number of the specific lockup it was stored in was 616, a reference to the designated name of the main universe in Marvel's comic books. Speaking of that storage facility in San Francisco, the security guard who let Scott Lang out of there was a well-known star in disguise, none other than Ken Jeong. His Community co-star Yvette Nicole Brown also appeared in Avengers Endgame, but her cameo was more easily identifiable. She was in the elevator with Steve Rogers and Tony Stark back in the 1970s. Rather interestingly, Jeong's character was reading a collection of J.G. Ballard's short stories called Terminal Beach. One of the stories within that volume happened to be a little number called Endgame, which is obviously no coincidence. In this year's Captain Marvel movie, and indeed at the start of Avengers Endgame, Brie Larson's Carol Danvers had shoulder-length hair. When Endgame jumps forward 5 years, and we see Danvers talking to Natasha Romanoff from space via some kind of holographic communication device, she's clearly had a haircut, which she's still rocking when she makes her grand entrance in the movie's epic final battle. If you're not familiar with the comic books, you might be interested to know that it's actually the signature look of the modern Captain Marvel from the source material. In the scene when Natasha was talking to the hologram of Carol Danvers, she was also talking to Rocket, Rhodey, Nebula, and Okoye, all of whom are reporting from their missions. Okoye notably mentioned the fact that there had been huge seismic activity on the ocean floor, but her plan of action to deal with it was to do nothing, because that wasn't their job. Could this have been a hint at the existence of Namor? We've already seen an Atlantis Easter egg in 2010's Iron Man 2. Maybe Okoye didn't feel the need to deal with ocean issues because she knew Namor would. One of the coolest moments in Avengers Endgame came when Tony Stark arrived at the Avengers compound with the news that he'd figured out time travel. He pulled up in his sports car and was greeted by Steve Rogers, who Tony proceeded to surprise by returning his iconic vibranium shield to him, which he'd taken in 2016's Captain America Civil War. As he handed the shield over, a familiar piece of music played in the background, and that was the theme music from Captain America the First Avenger, Cap's first solo outing in the MCU from back in 2011. Avengers Endgame revealed that the surviving Asgardians had set up a new home in Tonsberg, Norway called New Asgard. Tonsberg has a history in the MCU. It was the site of the Frost Giants' defeat against Odin's armies, as well as the town where the Red Skull found the Tesseract. In the comics, Asgard has floated above Oklahoma, and in an alternate Marvel Comics universe, New Asgard was the name of a version of Asgard that merged with New York City. So this wasn't a new idea. In fact, it could lead to an adaptation of the epic Siege story arc in the MCU. At the start of Avengers Infinity War, Tony Stark mentioned that Ben & Jerry's had named a flavor of ice cream after him, which Doctor Strange said was rather chalky, prompting Wong to reveal that his favorite flavor was Hulka Hulk Burning Fudge. In Avengers Endgame, in a scene showing some of the remaining Avengers sharing meals, there was a shot of Bruce Banner diving into a massive tub of the dessert, showing that, like Wong, he too is a fan of the Hulk-inspired creation. When Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Scott Lang traveled back to 2012's Battle of New York, we saw the aftermath of that iconic battle. Rogers entered an elevator with the Hydra strike team in it, including Brock Rumlow and Jack Rowlands. But rather than a repeat of the awesome elevator fight from 2014's Captain America the Winter Soldier, he avoided conflict by whispering "Hail Hydra" into Jasper Sitwell's ear, pretending to be a Hydra agent. This was a fun nod to the Secret Empire comic book storyline, when Rogers uttered the same phrase to reveal he'd been a Hydra agent all along. While they were in New York, the heroes altered the events that occurred there, enabling Loki to escape with the Tesseract. What you might not realize is that there could be repercussions to that in the main MCU. Tony Stark said time travel rules aren't like Back to the Future, so altering the past won't change the main timeline. Yet when Steve Rogers went back in time, he aged within the main timeline. Essentially, that Loki TV series could still end up taking place in the main MCU timeline. The Stan Lee cameo in Avengers Endgame, which was likely his last one, unless the late great comic book icon filmed one for Spider-Man Far From Home, was particularly joyous. It occurred in the 70s time jump, with Lee playing a de-aged hippie version of himself, driving past the military base with a female friend, proclaiming to them that they should make love, not war. On the back of his car was a bumper sticker that read "Nuff Said," his second most famous catchphrase after Excelsior. The reason for that 70s time jump was so Tony Stark and Steve Rogers could obtain both the Tesseract and some Pym particles in one fell swoop. But given that Rogers would have been recognized at the place called the birthplace of Captain America, he had to wear a disguise. The disguise included a shirt with the word Roscoe on it, which in the comic books was the name of the man who replaced Rogers as Captain America when the hero was going by the name Nomad. While he was at the military base in the 70s, Steve Rogers distracted the young Hank Pym with a prank phone call that made him leave his laboratory in a rush. That allowed Rogers to sneak in and steal a few vials of Pym particles, which would allow him and Tony Stark to return to the present. When the camera panned around inside the lab, just prior to Pym rushing out, we were treated to the sight of an early prototype Antman helmet, which just so happened to be the classic Silver Age Antman helmet from the comic books. Tony Stark got to chat with his father about fatherhood in that same military base scene. And as Howard got in his car at the end of the scene, a certain actor made a very notable cameo. It was James Darcy playing Jarvis, Howard's loyal household butler, reprising his role from the Agent Carter television series. What was particularly notable about this cameo is that in making it, Darcy became the first ever actor whose MCU debut was on the small screen to appear in an MCU movie. The epic final battle in Avengers Endgame began with Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, and Thor confronting Thanos outside the Avengers HQ, and it didn't start too well for the trio. Thanos got the upper hand on the heroes, even breaking Cap's shield in exactly the same way it was broken in Tony Stark's vision in 2015's Avengers Age of Ultron. Thanos also broke the shield in a similar fashion in the Infinity Gauntlet comic book arc, when Rogers stood against him alone. In a movie crammed with epic moments, arguably the most epic came when Captain America finally wielded Mjolnir in the MCU, Thor's original weapon. We'd seen him budget in Avengers Age of Ultron, but most of us just assumed that that was its way of saying you're the closest to being worthy out of everyone. But however, when he summoned it in Avengers Endgame, Thor said, "I knew it," which suggests he actually had been worthy all along, and simply chose not to pick it up in Age of Ultron to make Thor feel better about himself. Avengers Infinity War had that cool scene in which Black Widow, Okoye, and Scarlet Witch teamed up against Proxima Midnight, but Avengers Endgame went one better. During the epic final battle, Captain Marvel was trying to get the Infinity Gauntlet into Scott Lang's van, with Spider-Man commenting on how difficult it would be, what with Thanos' whole army in her way. Shuri, Nebula, Pepper Potts in her rescue armor, Okoye, Valkyrie, Mantis, Gamora the Wasp, and Scarlet Witch all joined forces to assist her, which is surely a foreshadowing of an all-female MCU team movie in the future. In last year's Antman and the Wasp, Hope Van Dyne smirked sarcastically when Scott Lang referred to Captain America as Cap, suggesting he was great friends with the Avengers leader. There was a funny nod to that scene in Avengers Endgame, when Lang and Van Dyne were tasked with getting the quantum tunnel back online during the final battle. Captain America gave them their instructions, and Hope replied, "We're on it, Cap," which is followed by her and Scott Lang sharing a meaningful look, followed by a smile. Tony Stark's funeral was a who's who of MCU stars, with everyone from Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne to Maria Hill and General Ross in attendance. But there was also a teenage boy who you might not have realized was an MCU character we were introduced to back in 2013's Iron Man 3. Ty Simpkins' Harley Keener. Simpkins has changed dramatically, so it was very easy to think, who the heck was that? In addition to the likes of Lila Barton and Cassie Lang, Keener's presence in Endgame certainly seems to suggest that young Avengers seeds are being planted in the MCU. Following Tony Stark's funeral at the end of Avengers Endgame, Jon Favreau's Happy Hogan, one of Tony's best friends, can be seen sitting with Tony's daughter Morgan outside the Stark family home. Happy asks Morgan if she's hungry, telling her he'll get her any food she wants. When she asks for a cheeseburger, Happy tells her how her father loved cheeseburgers, which is actually a cool nod to the first Iron Man movie from 2008. If you recall, when Tony Stark first arrived home after being held captive in Afghanistan, the first thing he asked for was an American cheeseburger. Thor's future in the MCU was hinted at when Avengers Endgame came to an end, as he joined the Guardians of the Galaxy in their ship, ready to head off into space for more cosmic adventures with Rocket, Groot, and company. The God of Thunder made a pun, calling the team the Guardians of the Galaxy, which is actually the name of a real team in Marvel's comic books. The roster is very different in the comics. Angela, Thunderstrike, Scourge, the Destroyer, and Throg make up the team. This isn't something anyone would have been able to see in Avengers Endgame, but it's a notable point that you probably missed. You know how Steve Rogers went back in time to place all the Infinity Stones back in the exact places that they were taken from, at that exact moment they were taken? In the case of the Soul Stone, that would mean taking it back to the exact moment it manifested on Vormir, which was immediately after Natasha Romanoff's death. So, rather horrifyingly, Steve Rogers would have arrived on Vormir to be greeted by the corpse of one of his best friends, and his oldest foe, the Red Skull. Just before Steve Rogers went back in time, he told Bucky Barnes not to do anything stupid in his absence. Bucky's humorous reply was to ask him how he could possibly do anything stupid when Steve was taking all the stupid with him. This was actually a cute callback to an exchange that took place in 2011's Captain America: The First Avenger, just before Steve met Abraham Erskine for the first time. The only difference was that it was said in reverse, with Bucky telling Steve not to do anything stupid and Steve firing back with the same witty retort. When Steve Rogers went back in time, he was expected to return to the same spot in 5 seconds. That didn't happen, as Rogers opted to stay in the past with Peggy Carter. But he did return. An elderly Rogers who'd lived happily for more than 70 years with Peggy had made his way to a bench a few yards away, where he handed Sam Wilson his shield in another nod to the comics. He was wearing a tan jacket, which appeared to be the same one he wore when he was still the skinny kid from Brooklyn in Captain America: The First Avenger. At the end of Avengers Endgame, we finally got to see Steve Rogers dancing with Peggy Carter. It was a satisfying moment, and a fitting end for Captain America's MCU arc. As the happy couple danced, a song was playing that you might have recognized. It was It's Been a Long, Long Time, which was featured in 2014's Captain America: The Winter Soldier soundtrack. The song features lyrics that are really appropriate for the situation.